year 2018. It's been quite an eventful one, and tonight's discussion is going to talk about the highlights of this year, with a particular focus on governance and politics, regionally and locally. We're also going to touch on major investments that have been made in the country, as well as media, and how we can grow it continentally as well as in Rwanda. My name is Diana Mpisi. I'm the host of The Square. I'm joined by my resident panelist, Charles. Good to have you.
Good to have you, and a Merry Christmas to you and everyone else.
Merry Christmas to you too. Ephraim and Brenna, always a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having us.
Great stuff. Yeah. And a very Merry Christmas and a joyous festive season to you all, wherever you are watching The Square. Tonight we have no guests. It's the last show for 2018, and we're going to start it the way we began this year, just the four of us on The Square, hence the name The Square. So I just want to know, is there brief midweek recaps before we kick into the show? Anything on this festive season that you'd like to touch upon?
Mine is not on the festive season. It's just something that just happened to me as I was coming to this show. My first experience with VW Move, the app.
Oh, okay.
So I was somewhere and I had to rush here and I didn't have a car. So I had previously downloaded the app, but I'd never used it. Amazing experience.
Yeah.
It's a great driver, nice seats, on time and everything.
Was it a Terramont? I know, free advertising. Was it an advert? Was it a Terramont, Passat? Or
I don't think those. It was one of the small ones, a Polo or something.
Yeah, it was the
amazing experience.
Yes.
Great, good stuff. Good stuff to Volkswagen. Brenna,
I would say mine is more international. It's very interesting to see. It's very interesting to see what's going on globally. So we had the U.S. midterms, and you had the Democrats winning the majority in the House. Now, what has already happened was, or what's happening is that Donald Trump wanted to put the budget for the wall that he used during his campaign to say Mexico is going to pay for. Now, he wanted to put it in the budget, but obviously, the House has refused to allow that to go through. So the U.S. experienced the government shutdown, and that affected markets to the point where even the head of the Federal Reserve he had to come out and ask the big banks to carry out stress tests to show that they were not going to crumble under some of the stress that was coming from the markets. It happened in Asia as well, in Europe as well, and I think this is also on the eve of Brexit. Also, North Korea also talked about it said it's not denuclearizing. Yes, on the basis that the U.S. also has to do so. It was just, I think, global politics this week was far from festive, at least for the global players. Yeah.
Brenna?
Christmas lighting.
Oh yeah.
It's nice to look at the city. It's well lit. I wish we would make use of the lighting, have more activity on the streets at night till morning. That is not happening yet. So which means the lights cannot finance themselves. We are paying for the lights that we don't actually use. You see them for a few hours and then you go to bed. So it would be good to have the lights finance themselves, and that's by activities.
I'm assuming this is coming from last week's show, which I missed.
You missed,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Good to have you back. Yeah, but that's a valid point. At least make use of the lights, and people are around the lights, and the lights are actually part of these services that then go into their maintenance and payment. So we'll kick off with this particular topic for tonight. It's a recap of 2018 with also expectations from The Square on 2019. And some of the topics are going to be recurrent tonight that we've talked about since we started this show in early this year. So my first question is to do with governance, and it's for all of you. And 2018 proved to be a very eventful year in governance in Rwanda, and we had these discussions on the show, mayoral resignations and performance, as well as cabinet reshuffles. And on the continental stage, we had the adoption of the AFCFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement for the Continental Free Trade Area. And that's where 49 countries have signed this historic document and journey and agenda towards really growing Africa's continent. So my question to you, This is just a summary of some of the things that we've discussed on the square, but are there any particular issues that you'd like to, what stood out for you in 2018 in terms of governance and politics, regional politics, so to speak?
I think for me, I'd want to talk more about the East African community. Actually, one of the highlights this week was Burundi recently named a new political capital, a place called Gitega. And I think just one of the highlights of 2018, and obviously this is carried forward from previous years, just at least the disdain, or at least the animosity that exists within the region amongst some of the members, or at least Rwanda's neighbors. And you can see that it has had an impact on so many things. Recently, when there was supposed to be the East African community meeting in Tanzania, heads of state showed up, and the meeting got cancelled. And actually, for the first time, it was the reason why one particular country decided to abscond. They made it very clear. They were asked, why don't you want to come? And they were like, we have a problem with Rwanda. And they laid a couple of reasons why. And I think for me, from a around politics and governance, I think 2018 has really shown that they still, as much as we seek for integration and we seek for at least consolidation and setting up of trade blocks to benefit citizens within those communities, there's still a lot of work to be done around political will. And I know we had the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Sezibera, and he came and he shared some of his sentiments around it, and he was very optimistic. And I think for me, when I look at 2019 moving forward, I think there's going to be a point where, at least my expectation or my belief would be in 2019, there's going to be a point where it's going to be hard for some of these leaders to continue with business as usual with some of these things. I think people are going to get challenged a lot, especially when there's that fear of moving, the fear of being left out, where you find you thought your neighbor and this neighbor were with you in this particular basket or on this particular bus, and all of a sudden they change their mind and they're all of a sudden in this direction. And then, and we talked about it, and I think I mentioned this as well on a previous show where I talked about strategic alliances, where I said in politics and in business, you focus more on allegiances or alliances more than anything. And I genuinely believe that come 2019, we're going to probably see, I genuinely expect to see things within the East African community get a little bit better, because to a certain degree, there'll be no other option, especially with stuff around AFCFTA, and just overall the AU. Yeah.
I think just building from what Ephraim has just said around business as usual, at the beginning of this year, at the leadership retreat, His Excellency the President was really without his usual self, being his usual self, not mincing words. And talking about, you could see frustration in his tone when he talked about business being conducted as usual. And then when you look at what was all over social media during last week's RPF Political Bureau again, where he's talking about, taking two steps back and one step front, and why certain institutions or the way certain things are being done should not be the same. We need to really style up. You can see that talk for 2018 has led into very serious shakeups. Yeah, heavyweights in political offices losing their jobs, 13 mayors resigning. And you can give quite a few examples. People being called back and from previous appointments or from the warming bench and being appointed to very strategic positions. That's a very loud message that 2019 moving forward is going to be a very different year, one, but two, that the appointing authority is not happy with business as usual. But looking at the regional play field and continental one as well, in any case from the beginning, we did not expect that the coalition of the willing or the East African community or the the African trade area was always going to be a walk in the park. It is, even Brexit, for crying out loud, the Brits are moving out, but even their moving out is not easy either for them or for the Theresa May herself. So it's always a very difficult play field when you're talking about these regional alliances, because differences will always arise. You will have differences with your own siblings, so you don't expect that you will have differences. I mean, that is going to be a smooth play field amongst neighbors. 2019 is going to be very interesting in the region because if Burundi has openly come out and said we have a problem with Rwanda, that means we are no longer hiding these things. Yes, it's an open sore wound, and it means a lot for our trading partners. Yeah.
Absolutely. Bernard?
Yes, decentralization. I think what we saw with the mayors underscored the need to get it right at the grassroots. Whether the current, the reforms we have seen, the new leadership will result into the changes that need to happen at the grassroots, it remains to be seen. But I think it was a kind of political earthquake, within the local government structures. Yes.
It was last seen a couple of years ago.
Hopefully it will not, as much as you would want to encourage resignation, it comes at a cost. The taxpayer is funding the whole process. As much as people think that if you fail to perform, you should leave, that's okay. But in the first place, how do we minimize resignations? People who take up these responsibilities should be up for the job. So it shouldn't be, I don't feel like I can do it anymore. I'm hanging my boat.
I have personal reasons.
Yes,
so to speak.
Personal reasons. So we need to see more accountability. Beyond that, I think it was interesting to see Rwanda become very bold with regards to AGOA. We saw our regional partners sort of backing down, but to see Rwanda, which surprised almost everyone, except those who live here. I think it was interesting to see, and it is a strategic decision that, in the beginning, it's painful because it's not easy for some of these traders who've been targeting the U.S. market. But we are already seeing that some measures have been put in place to safeguard, and the opportunities elsewhere. The other one, of course, is the CFTA. Now, when the signing took place, as usual, politicians will do their thing. The cameras were there, and we saw our expectations were really up there, and we expected the ratification process to be smooth. Unfortunately, it hasn't. But thankfully, there's a lot of progress. So far, I think
there's 7 countries left to ratify.
Yes.
Out of the 22.
Yes. Now, there is worry that if His Excellency leaves chairmanship,
which is in January.
Yes. What is going to happen? And in fact, some people have proposed that he should be made the ambassador of the CFTA, extend. Yes, because it's
rightly so. Though.
It's he's owned it, and he's personally, been hopping around, going to countries and trying to get them to do this. It's not easy. Egypt, which is coming in, we are not sure they're on board, but again, it remains to be seen. But we need to see more commitment. So the CFTA, as we came in, there was the news around France dropping finally. But again, for us, it's not news. It's not big
Actually, it
news
took long in
because
coming.
internally,
Dropping
the
charges
investigation, there's
on
no
the-
more
on the
investigation,
plane.
they've closed.
Shut down the plane.
That's something internally we have known for a very long time, you know, based on the mutual commission that was done. The report was very extensive, detailing what happened. But for some political reasons, you know, we know that France had its own strategic reasons as to why it thought this should drag on. So to see them finally saying, okay, enough is enough, we thank God that common sense has prevailed initially. So again,
Yes.
2018, I think, has been quite interesting. My very last one
Yes.
is
Go ahead.
with regards to the killing of the journalists, the Saudi journalists.
Khashoggi.
Yes.
Yes.
And the response of the international community, specifically the big brother, you know, seeing the U.S. Entangled in all this and them protecting their interests. You know, nobody saw that coming because as it is, the U.S. always pushes for freedom of the press, you know, the Fifth Amendment and all these things. So to see them talk about, you know, oh, we need to be sure, I mean, someone is dead, for Christ's sake. Yeah, so for me, it was well.
So you thought the reaction was, and you mentioned this multiple times on the show.
Yes, the hypocrisy of,
Yes.
you know,
The
the
US.
international community.
I think I just want to add something that you didn't talk about. This is now local, around governance, and I think it gave birth to, or at least it emphasized the conversation we've always brought up on the square around institutional coordination. Was the church closures this year. That was a really big highlight, and I think it was one of those things where it showed what could go wrong if people do not set the right kinds of systems and processes in place in advance. And again, my stance still remains back to what happened, what was said when we had the show around it. I think we even had 2 shows similar in terms of closely related around it.
Around church closures,
Yeah.
yes.
I think for me it was on the basis of you do not wait to reach that level to correct something. That prevention is always better than cure. And I say this because the church closures were so messy. At least it seemed like, because it became a point of contention for people who would want to say that the state is persecuting churches, which was not the case. The church still allowed, which is a basic human right, still allowed the freedom of worship. But it needed to be regulated in a manner that it did not exploit citizens in a manner that was counter to that benefit. And I think the institutions responsible for doing that did not do that job. This was when they found themselves in a situation where they had to solve a problem because it had probably gone out of control and then they woke up and they're like, okay, we need to know how many toilets do you have? Do you have parking? Is it safe in this environment? Do you have ventilation? Do you have procedures to manage if there's in case of a fire?
And you're saying this could have been prevented if due diligence was done
from the get-go, or at least there was adherence
Yes.
to some of these principles. Because, you know, at the end of the day, these are the conversations we have in Rwanda. You know, the policies exist, the laws exist, but who's responsible for implementing them? Because the person who designs this policy and enacts it into the law is not the same person who's going to implement it. And again, around this institutional coordination, you find that the person who's responsible for ensuring that if you come to register a church or get some permission to meet, you have to meet all this criteria. Instead of that person doing that job, they are lax. And what ends up happening is you find some of these things arising. So I think it was, as one of the highlights around it, it was really just, I think, a wake-up call to say that a lot needs to be done. Because, I mean, the scale of it, I mean, it was 700 churches in the span of, I don't know how, it was a very short period. And it was like, how do you get to that number of having to close them down, you know, without, at least maybe by, like, church number 300, that's not compliant. You're like, okay, there's something we need to address here. But I think that, for me, was the sentiment around that particular highlight.
That's fine.
Just to add, the recently concluded national dialogue.
Yes.
They
Which we also
yes,
had a show on
discussed.
last week, but one.
the focus on social protection, again, for me, is a big deal, because if we don't do more to protect, vulnerable people in our communities, I think we'll have problems, and we'll continue to have problems, and to a level where it may lead to insecurity, because sometimes we look at security in terms of, war, but there's also the insecurity of theft, the insecurity of, people being unhappy and, seeing protests. So having the national dialogue focus on, one, the functioning of SACCOs, which ordinary
Cooperatives,
yes, access to credit, I think more people who steal from the poor, in my view, deserve a death sentence. Honestly, I mean, you cannot steal from the poor. It should,
Yes.
I don't know what can be done, but anybody in charge of a social protection program, I don't know if when people are given these responsibilities, whether they understand what is at stake. If you're given, if you're collecting money from vulnerable people, this is all they have. And what you do is get more of it and go use it. Now we have local leaders that have taken most of it and even failing to pay back. It's unacceptable.
So what stood out for you was the fact that it was a key tenet of
the national dialogue.
The national dialogue.
Yes, and also
with also His Excellency focus on it. I remember you mentioned this.
And the issue of the categories.
Yes.
Yeah, because if someone is forced to be rich, it's a problem. Yeah. So we have to do more, I think, to protect our vulnerable people.
I think Bana raises something extremely important, and I did read a news story on Christmas Eve that caught my eye. I actually tweeted about it. The Minister of Local Government said that the local leaders who have stolen from the SACCOs, or I think the word is really not stolen, they have lent themselves money from the SACCOs, and the biggest defaulters of the SACCOs are the local leaders. And they have been given up to the 31st of December to repay their loans. Now, to me, I was like, okay, fine, there you want to really make a very loud statement, but how practical is that? They probably borrowed this money months or even possibly years ago. And we are left with 3 working days to the end of the year, and you expect them to have repaid all those loans? I mean, let's not take each other for granted. Who's taking who for a ride? That's not going to be possible anywhere in the world.
What's your suggestion?
Because the idea is steal from somewhere to pay.
But they're going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul. That's what's exactly what's not happening. But the point I'm raising is some of these leaders of ours should not be taking their flock for a ride. The statement is going to be there. It is bold. It is loud, and they think everybody is just going to believe it like sheep following their shepherd. No, we are not easily fooled.
So you think that money basically is not going to be paid back?
No, the money will be paid back, and it should be paid back. But for somebody to come up and say that it will be paid within 1 week, that is not practical.
It's not realistic.
Yes. But still on the political scene, I just wanted to make 2 comments on one national and one back to regional and continental. On the national scene, I think we are achieving impressive levels of political maturity. For Ingabire Victoire, Diane Rwigara, and the mother to have been released on mercy after having been convicted for their respective crimes, I think that is really impressive in terms of Rwanda's political maturity. That should be commended. On the regional and international level, at the risk of repeating myself, if we are going to continue having problems with our neighbors, we need to find a way of managing those problems such that life does not come to a paralysis or some, Ephraim being worried about traveling to Burundi Bana being worried about traveling to Uganda for a friend or family member's funeral or wedding, for that matter, because of political misunderstandings.
But how would you, if you don't mind me asking, how would you manage it in the case of the sovereignty of these nations? So, like, for example, that thing of traveling. If immediately you enter the borders of this country, if you have problems with that country, they have every right whatsoever to treat you as a citizen of Rwanda in any way. And I say right because you are the one who entered that sovereign borders. The question
There's
is
no guarantee.
Like, how would you manage something like that?
Well, I'm not sure I would have a direct response for that.
And I don't think that's even your
It's a rhetorical question. It's a rhetorical question around.
Yes,
like
yes.
it's not. I think it's not as easy as a one. You can't dance alone. You know, there needs to be a give and take somehow, and I think the desire will come from other regional partners that have some sort of influence over.
And also, can I just add to that between what you're saying, Charles and Ephraim? I think I don't think you have a clear-cut solution to how this will be managed. Obviously, I think this is something that we need to take our leaders to task to. But for me, what I feel, especially with the whole EAC rhetoric, how it started, how it began, and how unfortunately it's dawdling at the moment, I think as citizens we just really need to take our leaders to task. I know people have been talking to their leaders in different fora, and we're doing it here right now on the square. It's just, we as people, we're excited about AFCFTA, we're excited about EAC integration, and these issues, they should not hinder life from going on. So I don't know how, but I think if the rhetoric is constant and citizens are just telling leaders and policymakers, please do something, this can't continue. In 2019, it really would be a shame if things remain business as usual.
You're very right. I mean, looking, for example, at South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa was in Kigali a few months ago, and when he was put to task about
The
visa issues and Rwandans being able to travel as they used to, he was like, consider it done.
But that was a politician being a politician.
Yes. Now, several months later, they recall the ambassador. They keep summoning hours to answer all sorts of questions, and nothing has been done at all. So you see, walking the talk is something that has lacked very significantly in our political circles in 2018.
And I hopefully 2019 will prove better.
Yeah.
My next question is to do with investments. There have been major investments made in Rwanda this particular year, really sort of phenomenal numbers. I'll just read them out briefly. And the three I would like to touch on was the $400 million investment by Africa 50 in the Kigali Innovation City. This was a couple of months ago. And then, of course, we all know about the Visit Rwanda campaign and the deal between Arsenal and Rwanda, the partnership between Rwanda and the Arsenal football team in terms of boosting tourism. And last of all, Afrexim Bank's $100 million investment in Rwanda, mainly towards the infrastructure sector. So these are some major investments that have been made, and really I'm just highlighting a bit. And I just wanted to hear from you on some particular investments that have been made and your expectations from these investments.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would like to go ahead on that. I think for me, there was actually 2018. Okay, so in the overall mood of the private sector going into 2018 was optimistic. People thought was like 2018 can't be as bad as the previous 2 years. Guys were like, at least we're going to make some money, or at least we're going to recover from the losses we made. But beyond that, you could see there was some massive investments. One that you didn't mention was the Volkswagen.
Oh yes, but Charles mentioned it in the beginning.
And that's what I thought. Exactly in relation to that, I think it was really. I think it was really telling because it was a couple years in the making, and they were not just coming in with a traditional business model of we're here to sell cars. They were like, how do we build an entire ecosystem that creates demand? And I think he mentioned it, the Move app, which has been phenomenal in terms of making it efficient for people to move around. But beyond that, there was something that really, I think, there were a couple of them. There was the MTN syndicated loan, a lot of money.
50 billion francs.
Yeah, the 50 billion francs. But for me, one that's also a bit personal is the BK listing. I think it was really just
Bank of Kigali.
Yeah, Bank of Kigali listing, or BK Group cross-listing. I think it was one of those things that, so the nature of the transaction was, one, dilute government's shareholding to allow for at least a wider range of leeway to invest. That was one. Two, raise more capital, period. And then three, improve the makeup of the investor involved with the bank. And then also create a bit of liquidity or at least a bit of range for our investment portfolio in the country, to say that a Rwandan company is cross-listed as well. So what ended up happening with the BK cross-listing, and why it was, I think for me, such a big highlight in the year, was that you could see that there was a push. It was also done at the same time. There was a huge digitalization strategy being taken by the bank. Clients could, if you have gone to the Kachiro branch at Kigali Heights, there's no more paperwork.
But that's been there for a while.
To deposit.
That's been there for a while.
No, it has, but now I'm coming to explain why it is coming into. The whole idea is the full circle. The whole idea was that, look, let us put in this digitalization strategy as a bank to be relevant for the times, to catch up with, to also target the unbanked, and also to ensure that we are serving the masses. That was one. But then two, by ensuring that they can now go out and look for more money, feeds into that strategy to expand its portfolio, to allow it to grow.
Is aware that BK is looking for a PR officer.
No. I'm saying this because I think for me as a business, as a because one of the biggest challenges we've had in Rwanda as the private sector has always been the rate at which the banking sector keeps up with the times. And demand. So you can see that just this in itself is showing that things are going to be different in 2019, or at least we hope so, beyond all the other investments. And I think for me as a player in the private sector, it's pretty encouraging. I think amongst all the other things around trade was the Alibaba electronic world trade platform. We're yet to see how that comes to fruition. But I mean, this all happened this year.
I want to really supplement on the point Ephraim raises around BK cross-listing and give it a wider approach in terms of the entire financial sector. So the central bank announced that all banks are going to have to increase their share capital, the paid-up share capital, and there's I think 3 to 5 year horizon within which they'll have done it. Linking that directly with the amount of money MTN needed to raise, 50 billion, and also with the size of projects that we have, whether you look at energy, infrastructure, real estate, and what have you. Now, because banks are going to move away, commercial banks are going to move away from the mandatory 5 billion francs to, I think, 25 billion. It's almost fivefold. Because development banks are going to grow, I think, also them, it's going to move to 50 billion francs. Issues of where MTN is looking for a mere 50 billion francs and it causes all the banks to have to come to the table and do the deal, then that's an issue that is going to be historical. Where if you look at 10 years ago, the average deal size of a commercial real estate project was probably 2 billion francs. Today, the average deal size of a commercial real estate project is about 10 billion francs. So I think it's a huge step in the right direction as far as the economy is concerned, and we're going to have banks be more bold. Obviously, what will happen is that the banks that are not able to meet that minimum shareholding requirement, capital requirement, I sense a situation where there will be mergers, there will be acquisitions, there will be things like that, but also microfinances being able to step up their game in terms of the deal sizes that they can do.
Brenna?
Going back to the issue of BK cross-listing, I think when we look at BK, it's big, it's everywhere, but BK is not big enough. The 50, how much was it for
50
MTN?
billion.
50 billion that we're talking about for MTN, BK should be able to do it. Now, I understand that part of the reason why they have to do the syndicate is to minimize the risk and share the risk. But you need a bigger anchor bank for big projects, especially looking at the growth needs of our economy. Currently, we are at a disadvantage because most of the borrowing is done abroad in foreign currency, and when it comes here, you know, if someone has to pay back in foreign currency, the cost goes up.
The rocket, yes.
Yes, so we need more banks with more money. So as much as we would like to look at BK and say it's big, it has to grow and become bigger and be able to do more financing, which brings me to the other investment I needed to talk about, low-cost housing. We saw World Bank come in, and who else came in to support BRD?
IFC.
Yes.
IFC being a branch, the private
the World
bank.
Bank.
Yeah,
World Bank,
so
yes.
ideally we should have our local banks do these kind of projects. But as it is, access to long-term financing is still a problem, which goes back to the savings, developing a savings culture. It was also discussed during the national dialogue, and I think there's a new initiative to mobilize savings. Now, I don't know how it's going to be done, but we need a lot of money, and we need money in Rwandan francs. Because if you look at what's happening in the global environment, the foreign exchange risk, I don't think we can afford it.
We can't afford
Actually,
what?
No, we can't afford to
Just be
continue
specific.
borrowing in foreign currency and lending, and then people have to pay back in foreign currency. That mismatch continues to be a big problem for our financial sector. So that's key. Then Bugesera Airport, we saw it's now green. It's a green airport, big project.
400 million, is it? Yeah.
It's, I think, now beyond that. I mean, you can imagine what it takes to have a green airport. It's one of its kind. Quite exciting, quite ambitious. It will be interesting to see how that turns out. Again, it's linked to the innovation city. We are already seeing Kigali City Council coming up with a new bus shelters, which are part of that bigger project. So I think 2019 will be exciting because most of these investments will be maturing. Whether the economy is ready to absorb them, again, it remains to be said.
Yeah, I want to talk about Bana's last point on the economy being able to absorb, and what Ephraim said earlier on around building the ecosystem. When IFC came up with this, when they signed the deal with the government of Rwanda on the mortgage fund, the housing fund, I think it's worth about $150 million. And they're supposed to match it, so ideally it should grow to $300 million. Now, that is supposed to come in to cover the lack of long-term finance for mortgage borrowers. That is because there's quite a number of pipeline of projects coming up, including the largest housing development that will be in Kinyinya City, 10,000 homes, add about 3,000 being done in Dera, add another 2,500 in Rugarama. And, you know, when you look at all these projects that are in the offing, the point of the absorption capacity comes in to really be valid and important. So the move to create the mortgage fund could not be more timely than it was. Obviously, there are still issues on how we see that being managed, especially because BRD had its historical issues and the people at the helm getting into the troubles, unfortunately, they got into. Our capacity to absorb, I think, should be beyond whether we can consume the product, but whether we can also administratively and from a governance perspective be able to manage what comes with money.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ephraim, quickly before we go for the break.
No, I think just to bring it full circle around Bernard's last point and what Charlie spoke on about the state of the economy and its ability to absorb, I think a lot has been done around rural development and to build the capacity of Rwandans beyond Kigali. And you can see that it's starting to have an impact. I think 2018, so something around when you mentioned foreign currency and foreign borrowings, there were a couple of loans that the government of 2018, and it was good to see that the country did not suffer. At least there were some shocks here and there around the fluctuation of the dollar against the Rwandan franc and other currencies, and also like liquidity issues in the market. But you find at the end of the day, we were able to handle that. And I think it's true testament to some of the economic planning that goes into some of these things. And I think tied in with building in local capacity with the distribution of some of these, what do you call them, the universities, the campuses are across the country. You can see that it's secondary cities. You can see that there's an understanding of that need to build capacity beyond the urban area. That's one. But then two, I wanted to just bring up something.
Secondary cities, basically.
Yeah, secondary cities. I think for me, there's just something that on a personal level, this is something that throughout the year and I think it's a desire I would like to see moving forward in Rwanda, is around this thing that I brought up earlier in the year about social enterprises. I had a chance to talk with somebody from Latin America, and they were mentioning that this actually became a serious problem for them.
I know you've mentioned this in fora, local fora, where actually our head of state is, as well as on the square.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're bringing it up again.
Yeah,
very quickly though.
The idea is obviously we need to develop regulation to ensure that we are not 5 years from now trying to cure versus when we had an opportunity to prevent.
And for our viewers and audiences, your issue is to the social enterprises that take on work that is normally done by a private sector entity.
Exactly. So the idea is that if there's an ecosystem.
An NGO, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. There's an ecosystem. So the ecosystem includes businesses, customers, banks, suppliers, etc. Now, I as a business person will go borrow money from Bank of Kigali at 18%. Now, I have to invest that money and generate some economic value, and I have to pay back the 18%. I have to pay back the principal plus the 18%, plus some value on my side to grow my business. But what happens is that if my competitor comes in and is registered at RDB but is receiving donor money, they are told you have to spend. They get the same amount of money I got from the bank, which I have to pay back plus interest. They are told finish the money. So technically, the money is negative interest money. So they drop the prices. They do this. They do that.
And it affects your business.
It affects not just me, the ecosystem, because then the bank doesn't have a client to lend to, my supplier doesn't have somebody to sell to, the customer may be happy for a short time, but if that person decides they stop getting donor funds, they can just pack up and go. Because most of these social enterprises are international organizations. And I kept trying to say, we need to address it now before it becomes a real problem that we now have to step back and we lose a lot.
Okay, we're going for the break briefly. Please stay tuned. We are just going to go for a slight break. We're here discussing on the square a review of 2018 as well as expectations for the coming year, 2019. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to The Square. We are discussing 2018 highlights as well as expectations for 2019. And some of the key areas we've touched on are to do with governance and politics, not only locally, but regionally and continentally, as well as major investments in Rwanda and our expectations of them in the year 2019. The last part of the show is going to focus on media, or rather it's the growth of media continentally and different dynamics to it. And I'll start with the fact that recently the BBC renewed its entry into Africa with the launch of BBC Nairobi, which is the biggest bureau outside the BBC in London, outside the United Kingdom. And my question to us as people not only involved in media, but literally on the RBA is to do with how this major investment highlighted how African companies or governments or private sectors how little they invest in the media. And you have one huge foreign media corporation investing in Africa, a huge major investment. And what some critics have said is that this actually makes Africans have little agency in terms of the African narrative, the African agenda, in terms of media. And I want to hear from you on your take on this. And Brenda, I'll start with you as someone who's who's a renowned journalist and a media practitioner.
Whose media house is not owned by an African.
So there's conflict of interest. But I was actually disappointed that my employer has a partnership with BBC to relay their content.
Why were you disappointed by that?
I was disappointed because I think...
what would you have them rather have done?
We should be investing in our own content.
But maybe they had a partnership with BBC to relay content because no other African entities stepping up to the game.
There's nothing like that. We have the resources. It's always about what's your priority, you know, getting your priorities right. And I don't know, for a very long time, for most of our leadership on the continent, they don't seem to realize that the 21st century, the war is about information. Who dominates the narrative? Who, So the UK government, as much as the BBC is independent of the UK government, BBC is a British brand.
Just on that, the funding of this expansion is actually being funded by the UK government, according to information, to a tune of $397 million.
Yes, and
dollars. So
yes, and
$376 million dollars.
And yes. Always, when they mention that figure, they will tell you the journalists are independent. But one common thing is, I mean, what we all agree is when you look at the BBC, you look at UK, whether you like it or not. So even if we're just to say, let's invest in branding for the continent, do we have a channel that speaks for the continent? We don't have it.
You have the Al Jazeera's, you have...
No, Al Jazeera is not...
No, I'm saying other regions have their own, investments in media houses.
Yeah,
Africa, we can't really say this.
We don't have that. And we have public broadcasters in African countries that are happy to relay BBC content. Now, as a Chevening scholar,
I'm also a Chevening scholar.
I shouldn't be saying that.
No, I appreciate the support by Chevening, but what you're saying is true. Investments need to be done by African governments.
We need to make that, and it has to be deliberate. And two, I think we cannot shy away from the need for professional journalists. The BBC is not taking any mediocre journalists, But wherever these people are coming from, they're leaving a huge gap.
600 journalists are going to be based in Nairobi.
Yes, and from all over the continent. So you can imagine the gap. And for some reason, we don't see that as a problem. So for me, in reaction to that, I was personally disappointed to see some of the partnerships with African countries, public broadcasters that are happy to relay their content instead of investing in our own content, empowering our own journalists to speak, to tell our story, to tell our narrative, improving the conditions for journalists, because most of the time, if you ask me to be very frank, with the BBC, people who move to the BBC, it's not always about money. It's about, sometimes it's the space, because as much as the BBC is financed by the UK government, they have the space to tell some stories, in a certain way. You know, do we have that environment in, across the continent? Most of the time it's lacking, you know.
I feel otherwise. And just to throw a spanner in the works, I think it's actually very good that BBC set up that huge $400 million investment, close to $400 million investment. My only problem with it is I wish they would have brought it to Kigali. But, you know, it is business. It's not charity. They actually realize that if we are to set up this huge investment in an African broadcasting station, we are most likely, one, going to relate more with Africa where good stories are. Two, get very good talent, as Bana was saying, from this, because somebody, a Media House X, RBA, whoever.
Investment is in training over 300 journalists.
Thank you very much.
That's major.
Yes, but let's even think about it in a wider scale. The biggest conglomerate the biggest company that's acquired several cement companies is a French company called Lafarge. Lafarge's biggest revenues are coming from Africa at the moment. You go to South Africa, British Airways flies domestic routes, Cape Town, Durban, Joburg, Bloemfontein, you find British Airways there. You will go to whatever sector you can think about, finance, you'll find Barclays and what have you. So let's not be too emotional about these things.
It's not
let's not be too sentimental about these things.
Brenda,
Yes,
I don't think it's being emotional.
Can frame way in? We're about to finish.
Yes.
No, seriously, frankly speaking, there are politics in everything. There's the politics of media. And we cannot be naive to understanding the impact it has on the media it has on so many things within our society. And I bring this up, a simple example. There's a gentleman called Jeff Bezos. I don't know if you guys know Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world right now, worth I think almost $120 billion. He owns a company called Amazon. Now, sometime, I think either in 2015 or 2016, I think it was even 2014, he bought the Washington Post. Now people were like, why is this tech billionaire buying the Washington Post? Now, between the time he bought it and up until now, the share price of Amazon has skyrocketed in a manner like no other. And even around the same time, Amazon undertook one of the largest acquisitions in American history. They bought a company called Whole Foods for $30 billion. Now, I'm saying all of this because you find that somebody like that understands the power he needs to be able to invest in something like this. And the same thing happens on the continent, why we're not having investment in some of these things and why the British would do it, is that people haven't yet understood the power behind media and owning the narrative. And you mentioned it earlier.
Just to say, when you say media, I think we lose it.
Yes.
It's about information. It's about controlling. It's as simple as that. Okay. Who controls the narrative? It's about information, nothing else. You know, because when we talk about media, sometimes people are just probably in their heads imagining journalists. But it's about what are these journalists relaying?
Information, basically.
Yes, it's about information.
I'd like us to get to our closing remarks. We've reached the end of our show, a recap of 2018. Can I just have from you very quickly, each of you, quick expectations in the coming year? Based on what we've spoken about as we close.
I expect better business.
Okay.
More liquidity, yeah.
Brenda?
I think 2019 will be exciting. With the CFTA, I'm very optimistic that we'll get the 7 and we'll get the CFTA. We'll get the CFTA working. It will be interesting to see how the financial sector responds to the new capital requirements because they also affect the insurance.
Okay. Charlie?
Excited, first, on a totally different note, but related to all of us. Excited in 2018 we started the Square. Yes. And I believe we are growing as every show goes by. And we hope that in 2018 our viewers... 2019, sorry. Our viewers can be able to give us feedback so that in 2019 we can be better and improve. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, to supplement that point, I would just like to let you know that we've had really, really good engagement with our viewers on social media, on TV, people we meet on the streets, and really I think what I'm personally looking for is also taking this show to the next level based on the feedback. In fact, today some of the tweets and over the couple of months, have been really interesting to note on how we can actually improve. But I'd just like to end the show by wishing you all a joyous festive season, and I'll see you all next year, which is next week Wednesday. Next week Wednesday. To our viewers, thank you very much for joining us and being with us this year. We started this year, and we're definitely going to be around for another couple of years. Thank you much for your support, for your feedback to our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. I'd like to thank you as always. Please keep the conversation going using the hashtag #TheSquareRW. Have a very, very good evening and a very happy new year to you all. Have a good night.